thought that reading was a rather strange one. A tedious list of names, easy to rush through. Sometimes don't we get to those lists in the Bible and we sort of skip a few verses, or we overlook them. But this is Jesus' genealogy, and it's an important starting place for Matthew, who's a former tax collector and turned a biblical scholar. He's writing to fellow Jews to impart the importance that this man Jesus and his Jewish heritage. Now I wonder if any of you have tried to write out your family tree, or have you further tried to explore how far back you can go? It seems to have become a bit of a growing hobby, and many online sites that can help you. There's one that was saw recently advertised on the telly, Ancestry.com. They make it a business, doing the hard work for you, for a fee of course. And then there's programs like Who Do You Think You Are? Who's seen Who Do You Think You Are with the various celebrities? Yeah. They've fueled the fire, of course. Census details, birth and death certificates are now held online, and churches hold records of baptisms and marriages, which makes the task easier now than it ever was. Indeed, I was saying it might become more complicated for future generations as families become more complicated, with splits, remarriages, living together, step families, blended families. And with baptisms and marriages less popular, records will be sought from alternative sources. So I thought it would be easier and yet difficult because you don't have that. And my son said, no, it'll be very easy, Mum. They'll know more about you than they ever did because they'll trawl the social media sites. That's a worrying thought, because all your life, well, they'll know all about, because nothing gets deleted on social media. You might delete it, but the experts can find it, so nothing. So our social media profiles will be where they look for and find all this information. It will still be important to know who you are and where you came from. And for the Israelite nation, it was extremely important that they needed to be able to trace their heritage all the way back to Abraham. So in their very DNA, they would know all the way. Something they were able to do until the temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. And so it was for Jesus, born of the line of David, and thus fulfilling that messianic prophecy. And I guess if we were to look into it all, we've all got a bit of a checkered past. Skeletons in the cupboard that we may or may not know about. Many celebrities on Who Do You Think You Are found heroes and villains in their family trees. After all, that's what makes good TV. And evidence of illegitimacy, felony, shady characters, as well as the upstanding and inspiring role models, even aristocracy. It has been well documented how Danny Dyer, that Cockney hard man of EastEnders fame, was revealed to be a direct descendant of Edward III, King of England. And it even warranted a spin-off series, Danny Dyer's Right Royal Family. It was quite interesting actually, but not that I'm a Danny Dyer fan particularly. But Jesus had his own interesting descendants. But I'm going to draw your attention to 4. So our reading, if you remember, was mostly Abraham, the father of Isaac, Isaac, the father of Jacob, and it goes on, the father of, the father of, the father of. But in verse 3 we read, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother's name was Tamar. And then further on in verse 5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. And in verse 6, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Now, women didn't usually feature in the Jewish family line. It was all about the father. So what's so special about these women that they should get this name check? Well, beside the fact that they are all many great grandmothers of Jesus, they all had, shall we say, interesting backgrounds. So today we're going to start a little mini-series on these women. I'm going to look at the first two, Tamar and Rahab. Next week Bob's going to look at the book of Ruth, and then Mary will share her thoughts on Bathsheba. Poor Bathsheba. She didn't even get a name check in the genealogy, but it's just referred to as the woman who had been Uriah's wife. That is until David seduced her and engineered Uriah's death. So Tamar, I wonder what we know of her. It's an interesting story, just one chapter in the Bible, and it sort of comes in a line and it's sort of a bit out on its own. And I expect it's not a story that you're particularly familiar with. You can read her story in chapter 38 of Genesis. You might want to look it up when you get home. But here's a bit of an outline. I'm sure you'll remember Jacob. He had 12 sons, later to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Judah was the eldest. We read that he married and he had 3 sons, Onan and Shelah. And Andy's going to read a little bit from verses 6 to 11.
So Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law, to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So, whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. And what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household.
So here is poor Tamar, a widow twice over, and now exiled to live back with her parents. Oh, the shame, the embarrassment in those times. Can you imagine what life would have been like for her? Still young, sent home in disgrace, as if somehow this was her doing, and waiting for the youngest son, Shelah, to become of age and marry her. Judah, of course, had lost 2 sons, and we read that he was worried that he too, that's Shelah, might die like his brothers. So we have stalemate. Tamar, of course, is powerless. She can do nothing but wait for Judah to give her his last remaining son. And as the years pass, it becomes increasingly evident this isn't going to happen. However, Tamar refuses to be powerless. She takes matters into her own hands, and hearing that Judah, now a widower himself, will be travelling nearby, she takes the bold and courageous decision to change his future and hers. She takes off her widow's garments, covers herself with a veil as disguise, and places herself in a strategic position on the road and pretends she's a prostitute. He takes the bait. He sleeps with her, not realising that this is his daughter-in-law, and as a pledge for payment, leaves his seal and his staff behind. But stop. Let's put ourselves in Tamar's shoes for a moment. Ladies, how desperate would you have to have been to have slept with your father-in-law? Yeah, I thought that right. I didn't know my father-in-law, but I know it's different time, different culture, but even so, I'm sure this isn't something she would have done lightly. And of course, it is of great cost to herself. Prostituting herself, something for which she could have been stoned to death for, and nearly was, and with her father-in-law to boot. Did she not have another option? Well, I suppose she could have remained in that stalemate position, the perpetual widow in her father's household. That wouldn't have been any life at all. In fact, as the story unfolds, and I do encourage you to go and read that story in full later, she becomes pregnant. Judah is ultimately revealed as the father, and he actually says, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son, Shelah." So why is she more righteous? Because she actually enabled that line, that family line, to continue when Judah would have caused it to cease. The result is the birth of twins, Perez and Zerah. And remember that earlier reading? Whose mother was Tamar. We are specifically told that Judah didn't sleep with her again, but I'm sure she would have been invited to become a part of the household once more, and she would have been the cherished mother of beloved sons. So one woman with a story, many greats, grandmother of our Lord Jesus Christ. So our second woman is Rahab. Now she is introduced as a prostitute named Rahab. And unlike Tamar, this isn't a one-off event, it's her profession. But I wonder what her backstory is. How did she come to live this way and lead this life? The Bible doesn't say. But I think we can confidently assume it wasn't her chosen profession, but something that life circumstances forced her into. It's often referred to as the oldest profession. And sadly, it is as available today as it was then. But look, what does lead someone down this path? Excuse me. Usually it's desperate circumstances, vulnerability, and a constant supply of men willing to pay for the service. Supply and demand. If there wasn't the demand, there wouldn't be the supply. In Spain, sadly, we have a thriving slave trade. I don't know if you knew that. But last year, I was privileged and extremely saddened to hear of the work of a group called Hand for Tears. They are headed up by the wife of a Spanish pastor in Torrevieja called Mary Restrepo. And she told us how in Spain, prostitution is designated unlegal. Unlegal. That means it's neither illegal or legal. Isn't that typical Spain? It is widely tolerated and is even seen by some Spanish men as an initiation rite for their sons. The young women, usually from around 16 to 24 years of age, are from Eastern European, African and South American backgrounds. They are often accosted by a lover boy who promises them a wonderful new life in Spain, so they willingly come, or even encouraged and sometimes forced to accept this better life by their parents. But when they arrive, they're trapped. There's no promised career, there's no wonderful life, and they're required to pay the debt incurred to get them here. And they're put to work in the brothels and standing on the roundabouts. It's almost impossible to break free. They are threatened, beaten, their families back home are in danger if they escape, they are held captive, and some are even murdered. Hands for Tears befriends these girls. They go into the brothels and the roundabouts, and they give them gifts. They talk to the girls, and they offer to pray for them. They have a safe house in Alicante, but they're unable to get a license from the Ayuntamiento, and on Anti-Slave Day they were refused permission to hold any public events. But it's very difficult to save these young women. They're trapped, scared and in danger, but are usually unwilling to leave because of their consequences to themselves and their families. So I do urge you, please pray for Mary, for Hands for Tears, and for these young prostitutes, the roundabout girls. If you go up to Torrevieja, you see them around on the roundabouts a lot. So back to Rahab. As I said, we aren't given her backstory, but we do know she was open and available, not only to the men, but to God. She was willing to take the risk and put her own life in danger because she had heard the stories of the all-powerful God of the Israelites. We read her story in Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 to 15, which Mary is now going to read to us.
Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from." At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. "Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and what you did in Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall.
Rahab had faith. She acknowledged the Lord and knew he was all-powerful. She says, "For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below." And more importantly, she believed she could be saved. Her faith was rewarded. We know the story of how the walls came tumbling down and she and her family were saved. And we are told that she lived among the Israelites, and we can assume she took their faith and lived according to their ways, because we hear how she marries Salmon, who became the father of Boaz. Verse 6, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. I like reading biblical novels, and they are novels, they're stories set, but they follow the biblical truth and they put it into some historical context. And I've read 2 novels about Rahab, and both actually put Salmon as one of the spies that originally came to her house, because biblical readings and other bits, scholars have conjectured, that it is most likely that Salmon was one of those spies. So Rahab knew that God could be trusted. He does not hold our past against us. Indeed, he often works through those that the world would reject. We may not have been in prostitution, but we all have sinned, and we all fall short of the glory of God. We all have a backstory. I don't know the intimate details of your backstories, and you don't know mine, thank goodness. Perhaps that's just as well. There are certainly things I am ashamed of, things I would change if I could, things I would have done differently. But he isn't interested in my past. He's not interested in your past. He's interested in our futures. That is why he sent his son, Jesus, to cover our sins, to wash us in the blood of the cross, and to make us clean and ready to face our future. Remember the psalm Andy opened the service with, Psalm 130. It says, "If you, Lord, could keep a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness." So don't look back, look forward, and look forward to your future. Amen.
Well, there's some thoughts there to think.